Sukham,
happiness.
Two,
But
but,
idanim,
now.
Now.
Trividham,
Trividham.
of three kinds.
Three kinds.
Shrinu,
Shrinu.
here.
Here.
Me,
Me.
from me.
Me.
Bharata Rishabha,
Bhagavad-gita.
O best among the Bharatas.
Abhyasat.
Abhyasat, by practice. Brahmate, one enjoys. Yatra, where. Hukha, of distress. Antam, the end. Cha, also. Nigatati, gains. O best of the Bharatas, now please hear from me about three kinds of happiness by which the conditioned soul enjoys, and by which he sometimes comes to the end of all distress. So I say, please repeat. O best of the Bharatas, now please hear from me about the three kinds of happiness by which the conditioned soul enjoys, and by which he sometimes comes to the end of all distress. Okay, so I'm going to read three verses because these are all kind of naturally flowing from one another, and there's not much purport on any of them. So the purport here states, a conditioned soul tries to enjoy material happiness again and again. Thus he chooses to choose. But sometimes, in the course of such enjoyment, he becomes relieved from material entanglement by association with a great soul. In other words, a conditioned soul is always engaged in some type of sense gratification. But when he understands, by good association, that it is only a repetition of the same thing, and he is awakened to his real Krishna consciousness, he is sometimes relieved from such repetitive so-called happiness. So I'm going to read the next verse too. Yatadagre visham idva pranim pariname mritopamam tatsukam satvikam proktam Atma buddhi prasadajam. That which in the beginning may be just like poison, but at the end is just like nectar, and which awakens one to self-realization, is said to be happiness in the mode of goodness. So, purport, in the pursuit of self-realization, one has to follow many rules and regulations to control the mind and senses and to concentrate the mind on the self. All these procedures are very difficult, bitter, like poison. But if one is successful in following the regulations and comes to the transcendental position, he begins to drink real nectar and he enjoys life. Vishayendriya samyogad yattad agre mritopamam pariname visham iva tatsukam rajasam smritam. That happiness, which is derived from contact of the senses with their objects, and which appears like nectar at first, but poison at the end, is said to be of the nature of passion. A young man and young woman meet, and the senses drive the young man to see her, touch her, and to have sexual intercourse. In the beginning, this may be very pleasing to the senses, but at the end, or after some time, becomes just like poison. They are separated, or there is divorce, and there is lamentation, there is sorrow, etc. Such happiness is always in the mode of passion. Happiness is derived from the combination of the senses and the sense objects. It is always a cause of distress and should be avoided by all means. And the last one. Yad agre chanubandhe cha sukham mohanam atmanaha nidralasya pramodtam tat tamasam udahritam. And that happiness, which is blind to self-realization, which is delusion from beginning to end, and which arises from sleep, laziness, and illusion, is said to be of the nature of ignorance. One who takes pleasure in laziness and in sleep is certainly in the mode of darkness or ignorance. And one who has no idea how to act or how not to act is also in the mode of ignorance. For the person in the mode of ignorance, everything is an illusion. There is no happiness either in the beginning or at the end. For the person in the mode of passion, there might be some kind of ephemeral happiness in the beginning and at the end distress. But for the person in the mode of ignorance, there is only distress, both in the beginning and at the end. Sukham vidanam trividham shrinume bharatarshapha abhyasa dramate yatra dukhantam chandigachati. O best of the Bharatas. Now please hear from me about 3 kinds of happiness, by which the conditioned soul enjoys, and by which he sometimes comes to the end of all distress. In chapter 14 and chapter 17, and this chapter, chapter 18, the 3 modes of nature are discussed. And as far as I know, there is no other literature anywhere that makes mention of this concept of the 3 modes of nature except for the Sanskrit Vedas. No other literature has any understanding of this concept, that there is goodness, passion, and ignorance, or in Sanskrit, goodness is sattva, passion is raja, and ignorance is tamas. These 3 different items are the fabric of the world around us. And like rivers, goodness and passion and ignorance are full with currents that push us and pull us in various directions. We can't just simply walk across a river. We have to go through the water. And the water has eddies and currents that pull and push us in various directions. And if we want to go in a straight line, we have to fight, sometimes swimming in one direction and sometimes swimming in a different direction. So sometimes these modes are very strong and sometimes not so strong. And people themselves, they take on characteristics of these modes. So some people are identified with and take on characteristics of the mode of goodness, while others identify with and take on characteristics of the mode of passion or even the mode of ignorance. So if you are in the mode of ignorance and the outside current of the world is predominantly moving in the mode of ignorance, you will feel right at home. You will feel quite comfortable in your surroundings. But a person in the mode of goodness or a person in the mode of passion will not feel comfortable surrounded by the mode of ignorance. And similarly, a person in the mode of goodness, when the external environment is also in the mode of goodness, they will feel happy and right at home, comfortable in the mode of goodness. But a person in passion or ignorance will not. And as it says earlier in the Bhagavad-gita, these modes are constantly shifting, just like the weather, especially today. There was a Rath Yatra today in Queens, not Queens actually, in Brooklyn. And it was very hot, very torrid actually. And suddenly, whoosh, some rain out of nowhere. And then the rain went away. And because of the hot weather, the rain evaporated off very fast. So sometimes we have one thing and sometimes we have another, just like the weather. So a person who is trying to adapt has to take into account what the external environment is. And if a person is strongly enough situated in the mode of goodness, they can carry on even if the external environment is in passion or ignorance. But if someone's not very strongly situated, then they tend to take on characteristics of the external mode. It's easy for them to be pushed and pulled and to exhibit qualities of ignorance when they are in the mode of ignorance, or passion when they are in the mode of passion, and sometimes even to exhibit qualities of mode of goodness when they're surrounded by an external environment in the mode of goodness. So we have an internal environment and an external environment. And the external environment is the one that shapes those who make no particular decision about their behavior or their understanding of the world. So if we don't understand the world and we don't make specific decisions or determinations about what we're going to do, then we will be largely shaped by the external world. And the external world is by default quite strongly focused in the mode of passion. For the most part, our world is strongly focused in the mode of passion. So people will act in the mode of passion. And by acting in the mode of passion, you eventually come to the point where you burn out. And then you are gifted with the mode of ignorance. So the mode of passion pushes you and pushes you and pushes you, and you run faster and faster. And the world tells you, yay, go, you're just about to cross the finish line. You see the flags and people waving and cheering, but at some point you realize you can't make it to the finish line and you collapse. And then they wheel you away in a hospital bed, and you are now welcome to ignorance. Welcome to the mode of ignorance, where things are dark, where things are broken, where our dreams have flown away. We are far from them now. We can't even conceive of reaching our ambitions now that we're in ignorance. But in ignorance, there's always one consolation. We can get intoxicated. So that's how the people of the modern world deal with it. When their ambition in the mode of passion fails and they are broken into the mode of ignorance, then they just go with the flow of ignorance and start getting intoxicated. And this makes it seem okay. In fact, we sort of live in a parallel world of double illusion. The world already is illusion, but when a person gets intoxicated on a regular basis, they're living in an illusion within an illusion. So it's a double strong, double dose illusion. Industrial strength illusion. So we have this idea of the modes. And this chapter, chapter 18, really discusses the modes of nature quite a lot. So we hear, in the beginning about renunciation, then we hear about knowledge, then we hear about action, then we hear about workers, then we hear about understanding, then determination, and finally we hear about happiness. So today we heard 3 verses, which is the last. Well, there's one more. Krishna's going to talk about varnas. We haven't quite come to that. That's the next thing that Krishna will mention to Arjuna, varnas, or the different orders of life. People have different occupations. So the Brahmana is essentially the mode of goodness, the Kshatriya the mode of passion, the Vaishya in the mode of passion mixed with ignorance, and the Sudra, straight on ignorance. So that's the three modes and the four varnas. But happiness, we hear that happiness in the mode of goodness is like poison in the beginning and nectar at the end, and opens a person to the possibility of enlightenment or to transcending the material world. This is the mode of goodness, and this is why, in general, we try to move our lives in such a way that we become mostly situated in the mode of goodness. The mode of goodness is about balance. The mode of goodness is about self-restraint. The mode of goodness is about knowledge. The mode of goodness is about focusing on higher things. This is all qualities of the mode of goodness. And the mode of goodness allows us to discover a kind of happiness that's much deeper. The mode of passion is a different whole proposition. The mode of passion is like nectar in the beginning and poison at the end. It's the opposite. So the mode of goodness is like poison at the beginning and nectar at the end. The mode of passion is like nectar in the beginning and poison at the end. And it binds one to the material world. And finally, we hear that happiness in the mode of ignorance is suffering. There's no happiness at all, not in the beginning and not at the end. So, mode of goodness, the happiness is at the end. The mode of passion, the happiness is the beginning. Mode of ignorance, no happiness, no how. Not in the beginning, not in the end. It's just suffering all the way through. And it brings one into illusion, sleep, lethargy, etc. This is the mode of ignorance. I always say that there are three words in the English language that are the most misunderstood words in the English language, and they are happiness, love, and freedom. Everybody thinks they know what these words mean, but if you start asking them questions about any of these concepts, it'll quickly become apparent that they've never really thought about it. And I just heard a quote today from some philosopher that was talking about knowledge. And he said, of course I know what knowledge is, unless you ask me a specific question about how to explain it analytically, unambiguously, and thoroughly, in which case I don't know anything about it. So it's interesting, we use words, and we use them in various ways. They are tools. And there was a whole philosophical investigation called language games, where we see that when we communicate using words, we're doing different things. We're not always making propositions. Sometimes we're giving orders. Sometimes we're asking for information. Sometimes we may actually be performing an activity simply by words. So these are called language games. And we all know them because we've grown up in them and we do them constantly. And sometimes we switch from one language game to another. And the rules are different. And words have different roles. And in some language games, rules are so that the words have to be used very precisely. And in other language games, it doesn't matter so much. And so that's how we can get away with using words that we only vaguely understand. And we do this commonly. So specifically, freedom, happiness, and love are three words that we think we know until somebody starts asking us questions about what these things are. This is the kind of thing that Socrates did commonly. He would take some concept and he would ask some prominent person who was supposed to know, someone who was a leader, someone who was an emissary of some kind of important role in society. And he would ask them, what is truth? What is justice? And they would give some answer, and then Socrates would proceed to show that their answer was superficial and completely untenable. And they would be humiliated by that. But this is something that all of us would find probably would happen to us. That we would discover that if someone asked us to give an account of what we mean by a particular word, we would struggle. We might give some synonyms, but if we wanted to give an analysis of the word, then that would become much more difficult. And there are some important abstract nouns like justice, freedom, happiness, and love we throw around quite a lot. But what do these things really mean? What do they suggest? And particularly, happiness is something we all think we know. And certainly, for most of us, we get a big bowl of ice cream, we take some bites out of it, we start to experience what most people will call happiness. Right? Maybe there's a few exceptions in the room. And maybe we would have our choice of flavors that would be the correct one to maximize the quality that we call happiness. But by and large, happiness or ice cream or pizza, both things have the same kind of general pervasive effect on human beings, that when ingesting them, they experience something that most would call happiness. But we can see that there must be more to happiness than this. I mean, certainly there's a kind of happiness there. It's undeniable that when people go through some difficulty, generally they tend to self-medicate by eating ice cream. It's a common technique. And seems to work pretty well. The dopamine centers that science tells us, open right up, and we feel a sense of what do they call it? The gelatin of well-being, or something. Somebody used that phrase. We feel that everything is right with the world until we start burping and we have to go to sleep because ice cream, as I've discovered, is an enormous sedative. And you eat enough of it, you go right to sleep, So, at any rate, there's side effects. But at any rate, this idea of happiness is a very slippery term. The Greeks thought of it on a deeper level. And they thought, there's a word, eudaimonism or eudaimonia. Actually, I think the Greek version of it. And that means a little bit more than this idea of just feeling some kind of dopamine or we use a lot of times these days, medical chemical language, So that's how we think about happiness. But happiness is more than dopamine being released into the limbic system of the brain. There's something more going on. And the Greeks thought of it as a flourishing, or as a sense of well-being, a sense of feeling satisfied with life, a sense of being sort of fulfilled, more than just right now having some sensory experience that we count as pleasant. So what we generally think of as happiness when we're thinking in very superficial terms is the senses meeting the sense objects. That's our conception of happiness. You have the senses here, sense object here. Take the sense object and you connect it to the sense, and equals happiness, provided, of course, that the sense object is an object that is pleasurable. And there are many examples of so-called pleasurable objects, and the senses can enjoy them in various ways. And Prabhupada, in his purports, he lists them. We can eat, of course, the primo, top one, biggest draw, world class sense enjoyment is sex. That's the thing that brings the most impact to all the senses. And so therefore, that's really highly placed in the consciousness of human beings who have this superficial understanding, the superficial view of the world, that happiness is senses meeting sense objects. This is, unfortunately, a way that people do view the world that we live in. And it's unfortunately the way people define happiness, for the most part. Senses meeting the sense objects. So the Greeks thought that there must be something more to it. And in general, I think many of us would agree that happiness is more than just contacting some pleasurable experience. That happiness must be a little deeper than that. That we are feeling our life has meaning, that we are doing something purposeful, that we are feeling satisfied not just right now in the middle of a scoop of ice cream, but we are feeling satisfied in some broader, general, larger, metaphysical way. And that is kind of the idea of eudaimonia or eudaimonism. And this is a broader understanding of happiness. And of course, synonyms for happiness are things like well-being, fulfillment, sense of purpose. These things are synonyms for happiness in a larger view. A person who has a very superficial understanding of their situation in the world will naturally come to the conclusion that the purpose of the world is to present before our senses various objects, one after another, moment after moment. We're in various situations. There's like a chessboard around us of many possible objects. And as time plays itself out, minute after minute, day after day, year after year, there's a cycle of locations and sense objects. They present themselves to us. Some of them are pleasurable, some of them are distress producing. And we get the object or the basic fundamental working principle as even a baby, that our goal is to try to experience more of the pleasurable ones and to get rid and somehow avoid all the types of experiences that we count as distressful or unpleasurable or boring or whatever it is. So, in this way, even from childhood, we are being trained that, oh, this is good to the senses, oh, this is bad to the senses. I like this, I don't like that. I want to get more of this, I want to get rid of that. I want to have as few experiences of that as possible. And our whole life is developing strategies for increasing the kinds of gratification or sense experience that we count as pleasurable, and decreasing the kinds of sense experiences that we count as distressful. And this counts as quote-unquote life with the capital L for many people. It doesn't go any deeper than that. That's it. You want to explain what life is? Life is a strategy for getting more of sense experiences that we count as pleasurable, and getting rid or eliminating altogether those experiences we count as distressful or unpleasant in some way or another. And we look around us and we see mostly everybody else is doing that same thing. Increasing pleasurable sense experiences and decreasing unpleasurable ones. But a little bit of investigation or philosophical understanding, and we immediately come to the realization that this can't be all there is to it. And if someone lives this way, and by the way, this concept has a term in philosophy, it's called hedonism, that we just want what we want, and we want to get it, and our life is based on maximizing our material pleasure. But a person who lives under this principle with this shallow understanding of the world around them will get in trouble. Mostly we see that any kind of sense satisfaction diminishes the more we do it of any particular type. The old smoking more and enjoying it less. So used to be when cigarette commercials were on TV, which of course they don't allow anymore. But at one time, back when dinosaurs roamed the earth when I was younger, the networks used to allow people to have advertisements for cigarettes on television, and they always used to use this term, are you smoking more and enjoying it less? Well, come to Marlboro or Cool or whatever the cigarette brand was that they were promoting. And this is the way it works with everything. If you like ice cream, there comes a point, if you ate it every day, that you would probably at some point think, God, I don't want to see another thing of ice cream. It would just kind of blow it out of the water for you. And it works with everything, including practically anything else you can imagine, that if you do it over and over and over again, it becomes kind of, you want something else, you just want to move on. And unfortunately, in the material world, the more we focus on just making the senses feel connected to a sense object, then we become addicted. We become destroyed by this continual sense gratification of a particular type. So, in Hare Krishna language, we use this term called sense gratification. Prabhupada used it. He may have even coined it as far as I know. Sense gratification. So we have senses and we try to plug something in. That's called sense gratification. And the more we do it, the more we find that we are becoming sick, weak, addicted, confused, and in general, our life does not become fulfilled or purposeful nor do we feel a sense of greater well-being. None of these things are part of that type of lifestyle. So this superficial understanding of the world as getting more pleasurable sense experiences and getting rid of unpleasurable ones brings us to the opposite. And this is why this Bhagavad-gita verse says that that happiness which is like nectar in the beginning, but poison at the end. So as we go through each day and various arrangements and collections of sense objects and sense experiences present themselves to us, and we choose or reject them as we go through a day or many days of our whole life doing this, we begin to realize that we are not feeling satisfied. We're not feeling like our life is going anywhere. We're not feeling at all engaged. And this is because this is a very shallow understanding of happiness. But for most people, they would find it hard to describe happiness in any other way because they don't know what might be deeper happiness. Now, deeper happiness means, as we heard before in the first verse, where it said that happiness in the mode of goodness is like poison in the beginning and nectar at the end. So, in the process of Krishna consciousness, we learn self-control. At least we struggle with self-control. We discover that the whole warp and woof of Krishna consciousness, or for that matter, any kind of reasonable living, requires that we don't always do what we feel like doing. In that flow of objects and situations that we encounter on a day-to-day basis, sometimes we have to say no. If we don't, then we're at the mercy of whatever's right in front of us. And the senses are always giving us imperatives. Here's a nice thing to see, we have to see it. The senses are telling us, here's a nice thing to taste, we have to taste it. The senses are saying, here's a nice thing to hear, we have to hear it. And so we are like dancing dogs. Whatever is in our immediate proximity, we're swept right into it. And it's even worse now with the cell phones and these notifications where 700 times a day we learn that someone has just texted us or someone has put something on Facebook that we need to see or whatever it is. So this is the sense objects and they're imperative. Here's a sense object. What should we do about it? Well, the most reasonable thing is to just go for it. And so therefore, if we do that, whatever sense objects is right in front of us, we just go for it. Quickly we discover our whole life is being ruined and turned inside out. So that's why people, even in our modern culture, say, I love this phrase, drink responsibly. You see that nowadays on alcohol bottles, Please drink responsibly. So please become dull-headed and completely beyond your wits, but do it in a responsible way. This is the idea that we have to somehow or other control ourselves. And this is what all the religions preach, what self-motivation lecturers preach. Everyone has to control themselves to some degree, to say no to obvious, propositions that the senses give us moment after moment. And when we do that, we gain a little control and we retake our lives, and we're no longer at the mercy of what just happens to be right in front of us, for better or for worse. And this is a struggle. This is why it appears like poison at the beginning. But if we manage to control ourselves, then later on we discover that we are actually feeling in control. And our health is not degenerating. And our consciousness is not turned into basically some kind of jello. We're actually making some progress. And of course, for people who have just blown it out, for people who have said yes to the senses, and any time the senses had a sense object that they could have engaged with, for those people who say yes, 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 for such people at some point they move right on into this mode of ignorance. And then the senses are no longer satisfied by anything. The mind is too dull. The willpower is too blown out. And such a person has nothing to look forward to. And so in this sense, then, there's no enjoyment. Except for the basic stuff like a couple of things that are always left, and that is sleep, intoxication, and sex. Those are the last things to go. You know, no matter how blown out you are, no matter how completely murked over you are from living a life that had no direction, no purpose, and simply said yes to the senses, no matter how unhealthy or physically broken down you are, those things are still available. You can still get intoxicated. You can still go to sleep. And you can still have sex, or at least try to. So this is the bottom of the barrel. And Krishna is describing these kinds of happiness because the other two kinds, the one where you are happy because the preferred modes of sense gratification are available because you are going for things and your body is still strong and hasn't degenerated from too much sense enjoyment. That happiness will not lead you to self-realization. And the kind of happiness that comes from being broken down, from having already blown out a whole life of saying yes to everything, no matter how bad it was or when it presented itself, that one will certainly not open you to self-realization. However, the mode of goodness, the kind of happiness which is self-control, of trying to understand higher principles, that will lead you to the possibility of self-realization. So that's why Krishna is explaining to Arjuna that there are three flavors of happiness, and these three flavors are the goodness flavor, the passion flavor, and the ignorance flavor of happiness. And two of them will not lead to self-realization, but one of them will. And that's why it says sometimes comes to the end of all distress, which means that a person has developed self-realization. All right, so that was a little longer than I probably should have went on, but I'll pause here for feedback, questions, comments. Yeah.
But it's got to be good news, David. If you're stuck in Rajas, which most people are, and they burn out, they could decide to go back to goodness. They don't have to go necessarily to become ignorant and lazy.
Right, but going from Rajas to Sattva is an uphill incline. Going from Rajas to Tamas is downhill. So it requires effort. And that's the tricky part. That's the part that makes it difficult. That first of all, one has to have knowledge. Most people don't even have knowledge, so they're not going to go the right way because they don't even know that there's another possibility. But those people who know, then they have to make the struggle. And if you make the struggle, you'll make some inroads. And if you're in good association or you know how to struggle, then it'll be way easier to beat the senses, to beat the current of passion pushing you down towards ignorance. You can beat that current, but that's not very well known. So here in Krishna consciousness, we talk all kinds of abstractions because we're looking at a different and a deeper level of reality. You want to live on the superficial level and have a vague understanding of what's going on and a vague understanding of what your words mean, then do it. But that's what it'll predispose you to going with whatever presents itself from the senses and thinking that's what life is about, and gradually disintegrating as you continue to follow that basic strategy. Yeah.
So if a person goes to a movie,
Right.
and he sees, the heroine is tied to the tracks and the train's coming, and at the last minute, on a white horse, the hero comes and scoops. Then if they actually feel some happiness.
Right.
But it's completely illusory because it has nothing to do with themselves.
Right.
So my question is that it appears that any kind of happiness, goodness, ignorant passion, and even goodness, altruistic, I want to help people, it's all illusory. Because it doesn't have any, this is my question, is it all illusory? Because it really has nothing to do with the self.
Well, there are greater and lesser kinds of happiness. All kinds of material happiness are temporary, and they are not substantial. The only kind of happiness that's substantial, now we're getting to the real final bottom line, happiness, true happiness, is a sense of redeveloping your relationship with Krishna, with God. Now, that kind of happiness can last forever. That kind of happiness is not seasonal. That kind of happiness is available at any time, any place, anywhere, to whatever extent you want to take it. There's no cap on it. However, as far as material happiness is going, our Baskin Robbins of material types of happiness, there are different flavors, but some are more debilitating than others. So there are kinds of material happiness that kind of dispose you more towards the mode of goodness, and types of material happiness that really can knock a hole in the bottom of your ship very fast. So they're better and worse. So, as far as altruistic things, helping others or saving others, being a superhero or whatever it is, you can do that. And that's a better kind of happiness. You will feel more fulfillment than the guy who's just shooting heroin every night. I mean, the guy who's shooting heroin would certainly feel a kind of chemical surge when the chemical goes into his bloodstream. But that doesn't come with any of the other stuff. The feeling of fulfillment, the feeling of one's life being good, the actual flourishing of the body and of the financial and social setting of the person, all that's missing. But with the altruistic person, you have that. You have some of those things. However, it's also illusory and also insubstantial because it's not, you still haven't gotten to the bottom line to trying to please the Supreme. And when you do that, then you get final, true, lasting, and unequivocal happiness that takes you to the stage where you connect into a life of eternal bliss, which is what happens when a person transcends the modes of nature. That's described also in Bhagavad-gita, as well as in Srimad Bhagavatam. Is that your question?
Yeah, that's good. And then it seems from at least the first purport that the essential element for making the transition from that illusory happiness to real happiness is the association of devotees.
Yeah, right. That's the thing that saved us all. That we didn't know nothing from nothing. And we didn't want to know nothing. We were happy just doing what came naturally, which was going to, at some point torpedo us. But we didn't care, and we didn't know, and we were headed in the wrong direction. And somebody interfered. And as a result, we got Krishna's mercy. And we thought, wait a minute, what am I doing? I got to stop. Hey, I got a better plan. Something came to me. I read this book, and I'm going to change. And this is how, in our reckless, the plane's pointing at the ground and the altimeter is going like this, and we wait a minute, and we pulled back up on the, steering wheel, and we're heading back up again. But, otherwise, if it wasn't for help from outside, we would have all hit the bottom. No doubt about it.
Maharaj, is it possible to totally eliminate the mode of ignorance from a person's life? I mean, I think that we are all mixed up with a certain set of goodness.
Well, as far as the external environment goes, you can never eliminate it in the external environment. As far as the internal environment goes, you can do pretty good. If you engage in devotional service and you stay with it, you're essentially in the mode of goodness, almost 24/7. It can be more or less eliminated. And that's what the process of Krishna consciousness is. What's not mentioned, but sometimes we do mention because it helps, it's a little point of clarification, is there's this mode that we call Suddha Sattva. So besides Rajas, Tamas, and Sattva, there's another fourth mode we call Suddha Sattva, which is pure goodness. And that's actually the transcendental mode. In the spiritual world, that's what you have, Suddha Sattva, or pure goodness, without any distinction. In the material world, generally, we have regular Sattva, which means more or less goodness, but still tinged with a good bit of passion and ignorance. It's still not completely purified. And that's why, people, they eat healthy food, they perform yoga, they maybe have very high ethical standards, they are trying to eliminate their carbon footprint, they're trying to do all these kinds of things. They give in charity. This is all MOG, mode of goodness stuff, Locke. So, we are doing these things, and they're good. They're not bad, but they're not the final thing. They're just getting there. So we have to go one notch beyond that. And that final notch is to recognize that we need to reestablish our relationship with the Supreme. And when we do that, we are automatically granted the mode of goodness, and we go beyond it because we begin to discover that happiness is not something we get from outside through the senses contacting their objects, but the happiness is something we get from inside by performing devotional service. And at first that's just a theoretical understanding, but if you do it for many years, you begin to discover it's not just a theory, it's a fact. I was just thinking, I've been in Krishna consciousness for something close to 44 years, which is the greatest percentage of my life, And no, I don't experience bliss at every moment. However, I do understand, and I have realized, that happiness in the senses just isn't where it's at. I don't feel drawn to things the way I once did when I was much younger. So it does happen, And how could somebody stay in a life that's apparently austere? In other words, you do things that other people would never do because they don't attract your senses. They're not the kind of things that make the senses happy. And on the other side of the coin, you give up things that most people think are wonderful. So how could you stay with that unless there was a principle? And this is what we call the higher taste. That in Bhagavad-gita, I think it's the second chapter or third chapter, one of those two. Vishaya Vinavartante Nira Harasidehina Raso Varyam Rasopiyasya Param Drisva Navartate. So Param Drisva, the higher taste, one receives, and Nivartate, they're able to give up. So if there wasn't a higher taste, if happiness was an internal thing, wasn't actually a true, genuine thing that you felt, why would anyone go this upward slope? Why would anybody walk up the hill rather than down the hill? There would be no examples of that. But that's the way it is. Of course, it takes some time, but eventually we become reconditioned, or rather unconditioned. We go from what we were at one time, where we followed the norms of our society as far as what is material happiness, and we now discover that there's a kind of happiness that's basically unknown to 99% of the population, and instead we are trying for that. And we are genuinely satisfied by it because we continue to do it, and we don't feel put upon. In fact, we would feel put upon if we were forced to do the other thing. So there's something to it. In the beginning, it's like poison, which means we have to give up things that we normally would have really felt happy about doing, and we sometimes have to do things that we would have normally avoided at all costs. But after some time, those things we would have avoided, they don't seem so difficult anymore. They seem actually attractive. And the things that we are embracing that maybe at one time seemed not particularly attractive, now are starting to seem more and more attractive. Our whole view, our whole emotional, our whole connection with the outside world is being redone by the process of emotional service. Yeah.
Can we say that actions in the mode of goodness cover the consciousness a little less, so it's more receptive if it comes in contact with, because here in this room in either 1966 or 67, Srila Prabhupada was talking about how the devotees, they're transcendental. And then he said, after a few lectures like that, he said, and devotees act in the mode of goodness. So Borjan Prabhu was here. So he raised his hand and he asked Prabhupada, and he said, Prabhupada, you said devotees are transcendental, and then you said they act in the mode of goodness. Prabhupada said, they're transcendental, but they generally act in the mode of goodness. Because you have to act somehow in this world. So by doing that, we keep our consciousness less covered.
Well, the difference between the mode of goodness and the mode of pure goodness is a kind of difference of slight degree. So you can call one the other, and there's a continuum. They're both called the same thing. And in fact, there is an underlying similarity between the two. But the difference, of course, is the mode of pure goodness is actually liberating from the material world, whereas the mode of regular goodness is not, because it has not come to the state of connecting with the Supreme. Whereas in the mode of goodness, you can connect with the higher principles of the world and recognize the danger of just a life of sense gratification. You can realize that, but you won't get very far, because the energy, the hoist is missing. It comes only when one is finally aware that it's not just enough to give up what's in the material world. One has to figure out what to take on in place of that vacuum of things we gave up. So we can't just live in a vacuum. We have to fill it with something, and that's what Krishna is all about. Yeah.
So Maharaj, does the Hatha yoga, or the physical yoga which people do right now, nowadays, does it elevate people to mode of goodness, or does it?
Yeah, it does. It's basically its purpose. The whole Ashtanga yoga system is essentially a whole materialistic tool for being elevated to the mode of goodness. However, in the age of Kali Yuga, a person is not likely to be able to execute it properly to come to the mode of pure goodness. It is possible, but the odds are very stacked against you to get to pure goodness through the Ashtanga Yoga system. You can get there through the Bhakti Yoga system, but not likely to get there through the Ashtanga Yoga system. First of all, because it's so austere. To do it properly. I mean, anybody can do the kind of yoga that people do in yoga ashrams. I mean, not everybody, but it's still even difficult for people in our world to do that kind of yoga. But when we're talking about the real kind of yoga yogis do, where one meditates for enormous lengths of time, etc., etc., that kind of yoga is out of most people's reach, and it's out of practically 99.99% of people in Kali Yuga. And even if you could follow the process of mystic yoga properly, more than likely, in the process of following mystic yoga, you would come upon the mystic yoga powers or perfections. And once you did that, then suddenly you've got a whole new world to explore, and most people go down that road and just decide to cash in on their new magical powers, and bye-bye for trying to use it as a pathway to reach the Supreme.
In the Gita, when Krishna is describing Ashtanga Yoga, he stresses you have to live in a secluded place, which leaves practically everybody out right away.
Right.
And I think it's safe to say that the way yoga, especially Hatha Yoga, is packaged, it's without any understanding of what the real goal is. And so, you do yoga and you reduce weight, or your sex life will become better, or without really understanding even what yoga means.
You'll become stress-free.
Yeah.
Those things are all there in Ashtanga Yoga, and for most people, that's what they're really going for. But they don't realize that yoga was actually for a higher principle, including people who are so-called experts in yoga or are from the country of India, etc., etc. They're still completely oblivious to what the real purpose of yoga was. And for that reason, but we could say that about everything, that in the material world, most people are unable to understand the real purpose of anything. They just live in a fog of, what's the next sense object? Oh, there it is. Refrigerator's open. I'll go right there. I just got a notification that on Facebook, Joey just texted me. I have to go see what that's about. And then, okay, my program is coming up on the television, so I'll go flip the tube on, and I go watch some fireworks, and the whole deal. That this is the way our life goes from moment to moment. So, yeah.
I came here because I've sung a love song to God called the U, we're like human beings, and my group has a table right next to the Hare Krishna people, and we know a lot of you, and you're very kind to us. You give us food and stuff like that. But anyhow, I started to sing your mantra, and I just love it. And I'm wondering, how come I feel a lot better singing your mantra along with the you than when I just sang the you? So it's been highly beneficial. It's created a better sense of balance, happiness. And I'm wondering if you can comment on that.
Yeah, the Maha Mantra, the Hare Krishna mantra, is directly connecting with the Supreme Lord. It's not just the mantra, and it's not just mystical. It's actually non-different than God. And in the age of Kali Yuga, it's an avatar or a direct expression of the Supreme Lord. And according to the Vedic literature, Srimad Bhagavatam, we learn that it is the best way to uncover yourself from lifetimes of material gunk. It's the thing that gives you the most bang for your buck of any possible spiritual practice. And that's why we're called Hare Krishnas, because we chant Hare Krishna. My voice is doing something. Hang on a minute. Because we chant Hare Krishna. And this isn't an accident, and this isn't a byproduct. This is a deliberate choice. I didn't think of it. Prabhupada didn't think of it. And Prabhupada's guru didn't think of it. This was given by Lord Chaitanya, who came as the giver of what we call the Yuga Dharma. In each yuga, there is a type of activity which is most directly able to pull one out of the material illusion. And in the age of Kali Yuga, it's the chanting process. So there's a verse that says, Kriti Adhyayato Vishnum Tretayam Yajato Makai Dwapare Paricharyayam Kalar, what is it? Kalar, something Hari Kirtanan, I think it is. Kalar.
Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Hare Rama.
No.
Kala Uttal Hari Kirtan.
It's Krite Yadhyayato Vishnum. Then in Krita Yuga or Satya Yuga, Dhyayato Vishnum, it's a meditational process, is the Yuga Dharma. Treta Yam Yajato Makai. In Treta Yuga, it was sacrifices, doing various Vedic sacrifices of various kinds. Dwapare Paricharya Yam. In Dwapara Yuga, it was worshiping the deity in the temple, having a deity and performing various yajanas or sacrifices or various puja or worship for the deity. But Kalar Yadhari Kirtanat, that's what it is. In Kali Yuga, the method is Hari Kirtanat, or chanting the holy name. So this is called the Yuga Dharma, the best way. And so there's another verse in the Kali Sandhurna Upanishad that says, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Iti sodarsakam nam kale kalmasunasanam nata para tarupaya sarva vedeshu drishyate. That after seeing all the Vedas, sarva vedeshu drishyate, drishya means to see. So after seeing all the Vedic mantras or all the Vedic literatures, there is no better way to overcome the pernicious effects of this age of Kali Yuga than this 16-word, 32-syllable mantra, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama, Hare Hare. So if you say it and you try to hear it, you will become addicted to it, and such an addiction will end your material life and bring you to spiritual perfection automatically. Yeah.
I had one other question. Like, a lot of the members of the group I belong to, they sing to you, and they've had out-of-body experiences on other planes. Now, I feel very peaceful when I sing the Hare Krishna, and it keeps me positive. But is that something that happens with members of the Hare Krishna, that they actually go to other planes besides this physical plane when they chant?
Generally not so much. We learn through the Vedic literatures that there's this whole world of subtle phenomena. We have the gross phenomena that most people are aware of and most people think about and most people talk about without any sense of either confusion or fear of being labeled as weird. But there's a whole world of subtle phenomenon, which, if you talk about, people will label you as weird. And that whole level of subtle phenomenon is very real. It's also material. And beyond that is a true layer of spiritual things. So, this layer of subtle phenomenon, which is, various mystic experiences going out of the body, astral projection, or having a connection with the white light, or various other types of things that can happen, encountering ghosts or whatever it is. All these things are part of a phenomenon that's also material, and that we call subtle material phenomenon. And then beyond that is the true spiritual phenomenon, which is connecting with the Supreme Lord. And that's what we're really targeting. So we're not so much into trying to either experience or catalog these various other levels and stages, although it can happen, and sometimes does. That's how I would respond.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. Other questions or comments? How are we doing on time?
Yeah, I think we can proceed to kirtan.
What's that?
We can move on to kirtan.
Okay. So Sasha's telling us that the bell has sounded. And we can go to our second kirtan, and then we'll finish up with some prasadam.